Picture this, it's the 9th century. England is not the united country we know today. It's a patchwork of warring Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and they're all under attack. Ferocious Viking invaders are sweeping across the land, burning, looting, and conquering everything in their path. Kingdom after kingdom falls, until only one remains, Wessex and its king. A young man named Alfred, who was never meant to wear the crown. This is the incredible true story of Alfred the Great, the king who saved England from the brink of total collapse. Alfred's story doesn't start with a sword in his hand, but with a book. Born in 849, he was the youngest of 5 sons. While his older brothers were trained for war and rule, Alfred was the scholar. He was fascinated by learning, poetry, and religion. He even traveled to Rome twice as a child, which was a huge deal back then. This love for knowledge would become one of his greatest weapons, but he probably didn't know it at the time. He was seen as a pious, intellectual young man, not a battle-hardened warrior king. But fate had other plans. One by one, his older brothers died, many of them in battle against the Vikings. In 871, after his brother King Tethelard fell, the crown passed to a 21-year-old Alfred. It was less a coronation and more a crisis. He inherited a kingdom on its knees, facing an enemy known as the Great Heathen Army, a massive, well-organized force of Vikings who had already conquered Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia. Wessex was the last man standing. Alfred's first few years as king were a relentless struggle for survival. He fought battle after battle, sometimes winning, sometimes losing. He even had to resort to paying the Vikings to leave, just to buy his kingdom some breathing room. It was a desperate time. The Viking leader, Guthrum, was cunning and relentless. He saw Wessex as the final prize. Then came the lowest point in Alfred's life. In the winter of 878, Guthrum launched a surprise attack on Alfred's royal court at Chippenham. It was a disaster. Alfred and his family were forced to flee for their lives with just a small band of loyal followers. He became a fugitive in his own kingdom, hiding out in the marshy and hospitable wetlands of Somerset, an area known as the Athelney Marshes. This is where the famous legend of Alfred and the Cakes comes from. The story goes that while hiding, he took refuge in the hut of a peasant woman. She asked him to watch some cakes she was baking on the fire, but Alfred was so lost in thought, worrying about his kingdom and planning his comeback, that he let them burn. The woman returned and gave the king a proper scolding, having no idea who he was. While it's probably just a legend, it perfectly captures his situation. A king brought so low he was being told off by a commoner in a swampy hideout. But Alfred was not defeated. In the heart of those marshes, he wasn't just hiding, he was regrouping. He used his knowledge of the land to build a fortified base at Athelney. From this secret fort, he launched a guerrilla war against the Vikings. He sent out messengers, rallying the loyal men from Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire. He was building an army in secret, preparing for one last, decisive gamble. After several months of careful planning, the moment came. In the spring of 878, Alfred emerged from the marshes. The men of Wessex, who thought their king was dead or had fled, rallied to his banner. It must have been an incredible sight. Their king returned from the wilderness, ready to lead them in a final stand. He gathered his forces at a place called Egbert's Stone, and the morale of the Anglo-Saxon soared. Alfred marched his newly formed army to face Guthrum's great heathen army at the Battle of Edington. This was it. The fate of England hung in the balance. The battle was long and brutal, a wall of shields clashing for hours. But Alfred's men, fighting for their homes, their families, and their very existence, were inspired. They broke the Viking shield wall and completely routed Guthrum's army. The Vikings fled to their fortress at Chippenham, but Alfred besieged them, and after 2 weeks, starving and defeated, they surrendered. Now, here's what makes Alfred truly great. He could have executed Guthrum and his men. That was the norm. But Alfred did something completely different, something visionary. He made a peace treaty. He forced Guthrum to be baptized as a Christian, with Alfred himself as his godfather. This wasn't just a symbolic act, it was a brilliant political move. By converting Guthrum, Alfred was bringing him into his world, under his god, and establishing a basis for a more lasting peace. The treaty, known as the Treaty of Wedmore, divided England. Guthrum and his Vikings were given control of the north and east of England, an area that became known as the Danelaw. It might seem like a compromise, but it was a masterstroke. It stopped the constant warfare and gave Alfred the time he desperately needed to rebuild and strengthen his kingdom. And rebuild he did. Alfred wasn't just a warrior, he was a revolutionary reformer. He knew that to prevent another Viking crisis, he couldn't just sit back and wait. He had to be proactive. First, he completely reorganized his army. He created a system where half the army would be on active duty at any one time, while the other half tended their farms. This meant he always had a standing army ready to respond to threats without crippling the kingdom's economy. Next, he built a network of fortified towns and forts, known as burhs. These were strategically placed all over Wessex so that no one was more than a day's march from a place of safety. These weren't just military garrisons. They became centers of trade and administration, laying the foundation for English towns and cities. He also created a navy, designing new, larger ships to intercept Viking fleets at sea before they could even land. Alfred understood that defending the coast was as important as defending the land. But perhaps his most lasting legacy was his revival of learning and education. The years of Viking raids had destroyed monasteries and scattered scholars. Literacy had plummeted. Alfred, the Scholar King, was horrified by this. He believed that wisdom and knowledge were just as important as military strength. He famously wrote, "It seems to me better if we also translate some books which are most necessary for all men to know into the language that we can all understand." And that's exactly what he did. He learned Latin himself in his late 30s and gathered scholars from across England and Europe to his court. He then began a massive project to translate important Latin texts, works of philosophy, history, and theology into Old English, the language of the common people. This was revolutionary. For the first time, knowledge was not just for the clergy or the elite. Alfred wanted his people, or at least his officials and nobles, to be educated. He established a court school to educate his own children and the sons of his nobles. He essentially kickstarted an English literary tradition. Through his military genius, he saved his kingdom from annihilation. Through his administrative reforms, he created a more secure and prosperous state, and through his passion for education, he laid the cultural and intellectual foundations for what would eventually become England. He united the Anglo-Saxons not just with swords, but with a shared language, faith, and identity. When Alfred died in 899, he passed on a kingdom that was not only secure, but transformed. His son Edward and his grandson Aethelstan would build on his foundations to eventually conquer the Danelaw and create the first unified kingdom of England. Without Alfred, the history of England, and arguably the world, would look very different. The English language we're speaking right now might not exist in the same way. He wasn't just a king, he was a visionary, a scholar, a strategist, and a true leader. He earned his title, Alfred the Great, the only English monarch ever to be called so. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I do, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating figures. Let me know in the comments which historical hero you'd like to see covered next. See you in the next video.